The teaching today is based on the Bible passage from Proverbs 3:5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Arthur was an ambitious young man, known in his small town for his intelligence and determination. Since he was a child, he dreamed of starting his own business, desiring success and recognition. Tired of the routine of his ordinary job, he decided it was time to take a risk. He gathered all his savings, made detailed plans, and threw himself into the project with all his strength. His friends and family asked if he had prayed and sought God's direction before making such a big decision. Confident, Arthur replied, "I know what I'm doing. God gave me intelligence, so I know it's going to work." Although he didn't seek God's guidance, everything seemed to flow in the first few months. The office was ready, clients started appearing, and Arthur believed that his success was a result of his own ability. However, he didn't notice the small warning signs that appeared. Poorly written contracts, dishonest partners, and decisions made in haste. One night, while reviewing papers in the empty office, Arthur received a call. One of the largest contracts had been canceled without notice, and a partner was involved in a corruption scandal. Sitting there, surrounded by scattered papers and a head full of worries, he felt the weight of the choice to trust only in himself. Still, proud, he said to himself, "I'll fix this my way. I can still make it right." But what Arthur didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a learning journey that would lead him to question his choices, and most importantly, where he was placing his trust. Arthur left the office late that night, his head spinning with problems that seemed to multiply. The cold midnight wind hit his face, but his mind was far from any physical sensation. Walking through the nearly empty streets, he repeated to himself that he couldn't give up. "I've come this far on my own. I won't fall now." The next day, he woke up to the phone ringing incessantly. It was the bank manager informing him of accumulated debts and overdue deadlines. The voice on the other end was firm. "Mr. Arthur, if you don't settle your situation by the end of the week, we'll have to take legal action." That news was a punch to the gut. He hung up the phone and for a moment stared into the emptiness. His office, once a source of pride, was now disorganized, with piles of documents and collection notices. What was going wrong? Wasn't he responsible for his own success? Determined to fix everything himself, Arthur started calling for loans and partnerships. However, every door he knocked on slammed shut even faster. Some old friends, noticing his situation, began to distance themselves. Others, with fake smiles, simply said, "Arthur, you should have thought more carefully before getting involved in this." Too proud to ask for real help, he insisted on patching up the holes in his project. During a desperate meeting with a potential investor, he heard something that made him even more uneasy. "You have potential, Arthur, but you're relying too much on yourself. Business isn't done just with willpower and pride. Something is missing." That night, when he got home, Arthur threw the key on the table and let himself fall onto the sofa. The silence in the room seemed to scream in his ears. He grabbed a bottle of cold coffee and stared at the ceiling. Why is everything going wrong? I planned so much. I deserved for it to work. He looked at the shelf and saw a dusty Bible, a gift from his mother years ago. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a heavy sigh, he reached for it and opened the book randomly. His eyes fell on a verse underlined in worn letters. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. Arthur abruptly closed the book, his heart racing. Coincidence, he murmured. I've always handled things on my own. I don't need help from something I've never looked for. But that night, even trying to push the thought away, those words echoed in his mind. The pride that once drove him now began to turn into an unbearable weight. Exhausted, and with his head full of conflicts, Arthur fell asleep on the sofa, not knowing that this night would mark the beginning of a change he never imagined. Arthur woke up on the sofa with his body aching and sunlight pouring into the room through the slightly open curtains. He sat up slowly, running his hands over his face. The Bible was still there, closed on the coffee table, as a silent reminder of the previous night. For a moment, he considered opening it again, but his pride made him push the thought aside. I don't need this. What I need is to fix this mess, he murmured. Despite his exhaustion, he quickly got dressed and headed straight to the office, determined to try again to fix the situation. But the news that awaited him was worse than expected. An eviction notice due to unpaid rent, and a legal notice about a breach of contract lawsuit. The floor seemed to fall from beneath his feet. With his mind boiling with frustration and fear, Arthur left the building and walked aimlessly through the streets of the city. People hurried by, oblivious to the turmoil building inside him. He sat on a park bench, watching children play and elderly people chatting cheerfully. How can the lives of these people seem so simple while mine is falling apart, he thought. It was then that across the square, Arthur spotted a familiar figure. Donna Celia, a lady he had known since childhood. She sold cheese breads there every day and always had a welcoming smile. Seeing him, she waved gently. Arthur, long time no see. Come, sit with me for a while. With no strength to refuse, he walked over and sat beside her. You look heavy-hearted, my son. Is something bothering you? She asked, her voice soft. Arthur hesitated, but in the face of that woman's tenderness, he broke down. He told her about the company, the debts, the failures, and the feeling of having lost control. Donna Celia listened patiently, and at the end, placed her hand on his. You've always been very determined, Arthur, but sometimes our strength isn't enough. Have you sought God's direction in all this? He sighed, looking away. I thought I could manage on my own. She smiled compassionately. My son, even the strongest man stumbles when he walks without direction. When we rely only on ourselves, we're prone to falling. But when we surrender our ways to the Lord, He will make our paths straight. It's not pride to admit you need help. It's wisdom. Her words echoed deeply. Arthur remembered the verse he had read the night before. It was as if God was knocking on the door of his heart once again. Donna Celia then pulled a small notebook from her purse and wrote something on a page, handing it to him. Here's the number for Pastor Elias. He's a good listener and can advise you. But above all, seek the Lord, Arthur. Talk to him like you would a friend. You don't have to carry this burden alone. He put the paper in his pocket and thanked her. As he walked back home, the words of the lady and the verse kept ringing in his mind. The feeling of fighting against an insurmountable wall was suffocating. That night, lying in bed, Arthur stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of despair mixed with a spark of hope. Finally, without resisting any longer, he whispered, God, if you're really listening to me, I don't know what to do anymore. I tried everything my way, and only sank deeper. If you have a way, show me, because I'm lost." The silence in the room seemed different that night. There was no audible response, no spectacular vision, but Arthur felt an inexplicable lightness, as if, at least for a moment, someone had lifted some of the burden he was carrying. With tears in his eyes, he fell asleep, unaware that this simple act of surrender would be the first step toward a transformation that would change his life forever. The next day, Arthur woke up with swollen eyes, but strangely, a lighter heart. The worries were still there, but there was something different. A subtle sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had imagined. As he sipped his cold coffee and stared at the mess of papers on the table, the memory of his conversation with Donna Celia and his prayer the night before echoed persistently in his mind. He took the paper with Pastor Elias's number and stared at the digits. Should I really call? What if it's a waste of time? But what if it's exactly what I need? He wondered. After a few minutes of indecision, he took a deep breath and dialed. The call was answered by a calm, welcoming voice. "Hello, Pastor Elias speaking." "Hi, my name is Arthur. Donna Celia gave me your number. I'm going through some problems, and she said you might talk with me." The pastor listened attentively as Arthur unloaded everything: his journey of pride, failed attempts, and the growing sense of helplessness. There was silence for a few moments before the pastor responded. "Arthur, it's courageous of you to seek help. Many get lost in pride and refuse to admit they need guidance. The first step, which is recognizing your limitations, you've already taken. Now, it's time to learn to trust not only in your abilities, but in something greater. God has a purpose for every desert we go through." Arthur listened in silence, those words affecting him more than he expected. But why me? Why is this happening to me? He asked, his voice trembling. Sometimes, God allows us to reach rock bottom, so we realize that He is the only firm foundation. It's not to punish you, Arthur, but to teach you, so that you see that true strength comes from Him. The pastor suggested they meet the following day to talk in person. Arthur, still reluctant, agreed. The next day, in a simple, cozy cafe, Arthur met Pastor Elias. He was a middle-aged man, with gentle eyes and a smile that conveyed peace. They sat down, and after a brief conversation, the pastor opened his Bible and read, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." 1 Peter 5, 6-7. Arthur, you've carried the weight of the world on your shoulders, trying to solve everything on your own. It's time to cast that burden on the one who can carry it. Pride makes us believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But, in truth, recognizing our dependence on God is the greatest act of strength and wisdom. Arthur lowered his head, and his eyes filled with tears. I don't even know where to start. Start by being honest with God. Talk to Him as you did last night. Ask for wisdom, and above all, trust that He can do for you what no one else can. After that conversation, Arthur felt something change within him. It wasn't a snap of the fingers that solved all his problems, but a new perspective. He returned home determined to start over, but this time, in a different way. He began setting aside a few minutes each day to pray and seek guidance from the Bible. Gradually, he noticed his anxiety diminishing. The solutions didn't appear magically, but he was calmer and his mind clearer. he had the idea to review his project from scratch. As he analyzed it with more humility, he realized flaws that, before, his pride had prevented him from seeing. He restructured his plans, and with courage, reached out to old partners, but this time with a different approach, without arrogance. To his surprise, one of those partners, who had previously refused to help him, listened to his new proposal with interest. "Arthur, I must confess your attitude has changed. You seemed unyielding before, but now I see you're open to dialogue. Let's take a closer look at this." More doors began to open, slowly but surely. Arthur realized that the path of humility was yielding better results than his self-sufficiency ever could. One night, sitting on his porch, he looked at the starry sky and smiled. "Thank you, God. I was blind, but now I understand. It's not just about me, my effort, but trusting you with my ways." The journey was still not complete, but Arthur knew he was on the right track. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. Weeks passed, and Arthur remained determined to follow the new path he had chosen. His routine had changed significantly. Every morning, before starting any task, he prayed and sought a verse to guide his day. It was a practice that at first felt strange, but now it had become essential. The weight on his chest that he once carried seemed lighter, and his mind, once overwhelmed, now found clarity to make decisions. However, as life rarely offers a path without obstacles, a new trial would come to test this newfound trust. One Friday morning, Arthur received an unexpected call. It was Ricardo, an old colleague who now held a position of influence at a large company in the city. "Arthur, I was thinking about you. I heard about your new project. My company is looking for something along those lines, and I thought we should talk." Arthur's heart raced. This could be the opportunity he had been waiting for. They scheduled a meeting for the following week, and Arthur spent the entire weekend reviewing every detail of his presentation, making sure not to repeat the mistakes of the past. When the day of the meeting arrived, he dressed carefully, chose his words thoughtfully, and kept humility in mind. Ricardo listened attentively, and at the end said, "I like what I saw. Your proposal is solid. I'll present it to the company's board tomorrow. If they approve, we'll close the contract next week." Arthur left that meeting with a contained smile, but his heart was beating with hope. This contract could be the turning point he needed. However, the next day, another call changed everything. "Arthur, we have a problem," Ricardo said in a worried tone. A competitor presented a proposal much lower than market value. The board is undecided. If you could lower your costs even further, maybe we can close with you. Arthur hung up, frustrated. He knew that lowering the price would essentially mean working without profit. His former self would have, without a second thought, reduced the price just to close the deal, driven by the rush and pride of winning. But now, he hesitated. "Lord, what should I do?" he prayed silently. "This is the opportunity I've been waiting for, but if I accept these conditions, I might hurt myself. I need your guidance." That night, as he read his Bible, his eyes fell on the verse, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Proverbs 3:5-6. These words sank deep into his heart. Arthur understood. Trusting in God meant not acting purely on impulse or fear of losing. He decided to send a fair counter-proposal, explaining that in order to maintain quality and fulfill his promises, this was the minimum viable price. I'd rather lose the contract than compromise my integrity and the quality of my work, he said as he sent the email. The silence of the following days was agonizing, but surprisingly, something began to change inside him. For the first time, Arthur wasn't anxious. He felt a strange peace, the peace of someone who had placed the outcome in God's hands. 3 days later, while working on another project, the phone rang. It was Ricardo again. "Arthur, the board met again. They appreciated your transparency and firmness. We've decided to go ahead with your proposal. We want someone trustworthy for this job, and you've demonstrated exactly that." Arthur was speechless for a moment, his heart overflowing with gratitude. Wow, I don't even know what to say. Thank you so much, Ricardo. I promise you won't regret it. I trust you won't. Your attitude made all the difference. When he hung up, Arthur dropped to his knees. Thank you, Lord. I tried doing it my way so many times and failed. But when I handed it to your hands, everything aligned better than I could ever plan. The project was a success. The company was so pleased that they recommended Arthur to other clients. And soon, he found himself with a full schedule of opportunities he had never imagined. But more than professional success, it was the personal and spiritual growth that surprised him every day. One late afternoon, while walking through the park with Dona Celia, who had insisted they celebrate with a simple coffee and cake, Arthur remarked, "It's funny. I spent years trying to control everything, thinking my ability was enough. And now, I see that when I took my hands off the wheel and let God guide, everything flowed more smoothly." Dona Celia smiled, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. God doesn't want us to stop fighting, Arthur. He just wants us to fight on the right side, on his side. The rest, he takes care of. Arthur looked up at the sky, now tinged with the colors of sunset. He felt different, lighter, more grateful, and above all, more confident. But now not in himself, but in the God who had shown him, with love and patience, the true path. Months passed since the contract was signed. The project Arthur delivered not only exceeded the company's expectations, but had also become a reference in the market. Recommendations came naturally, and he found himself surrounded by opportunities that, some time ago, would have seemed unreachable. His name had become synonymous with trust and quality, a bit of irony, considering the turbulent journey that had led him here. Despite his success, Arthur knew the greatest achievement wasn't the contracts he had closed or the professional recognition, but the peace he carried in his heart. It was as if, after years of struggling against opposing tides, he had finally found a safe harbor, and that harbor was God. On a rainy Friday afternoon, while organizing some papers in his office, Arthur received a message from Dona Celia. "Arthur, on Saturday, we're having a special gathering at the church. There will be coffee, music, and a message that I think you'll like. How about coming?" Arthur smiled. If someone had told him months ago that he would consider such an invitation, he would have laughed. But now, something inside him excitedly looked forward to it. "I think it will be good," he thought. He replied affirmatively and closed his laptop with a satisfied sigh. On Saturday morning, the sky was clear, as if the storm from the day before had washed not only the streets, but also the burdens Arthur had once carried. He arrived at the church and was greeted with warm smiles and coffee, which, according to Dona Celia, was the best in the city. But what touched him most was the message that day. The pastor spoke about the story of Joseph, someone who faced rejection, imprisonment, and forgetfulness, but never lost his faith. At the end, one sentence echoed in Arthur's heart. Even when everything seems to collapse, God is working behind the scenes, preparing something greater than we can imagine. Arthur closed his eyes and let those words settle in his soul. That was exactly it. Everything he had gone through, the falls, the closed doors, the exhaustion, hadn't been punishments, but part of a learning process. Had it not been for the pain, he might never have sought a higher purpose. And now, he felt more alive than ever. As he left, he found Donna Celia waiting for him. "So, did you like it?" she asked with a mischievous smile. Arthur laughed. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" "It wasn't me. It was God. I just gave you a little nudge." They walked together to the gate, and Arthur, looking up at the blue sky and feeling the light breeze on his face, said, "It's funny. I spent so much time chasing success and control. Today I realized that the real victory was handing everything into his hands." Donna Celia nodded. "When we understand that, Arthur, even the hard days become easier to face, because we know we're not alone." Before parting ways, Arthur said, "Thank you, Donna Celia. I don't know where I'd be if it weren't for you. And for God, of course." She smiled. "God puts people in our path with a purpose, my son. Just like He used me to help you. One day, you'll be that person for someone else." Arthur walked back to his car, deep in thought. Being that person for someone else. The idea stayed with him, growing in his heart. It wasn't enough to have learned the lesson. He wanted to share it, inspire others who, like him, once felt lost, tired, and directionless. Months later, Arthur created an online channel called Paths of Hope, where he shared stories of overcoming and faith, including his own. He wasn't seeking fame or applause, but rather to help those who needed to hear that, even on the worst days, there was hope. The messages he received in return were moving. "Your video gave me the strength to not give up. Your story is similar to mine, and today, I've decided to start over." Each comment reinforced the purpose that now guided his life, and in every story he told, he ended with the same words that had marked his journey. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Commit your ways to Him, and He will make your path straight." The cycle was complete. From a proud and burdened man to someone transformed by faith and surrender. Arthur's life wasn't perfect. He still faced challenges, but now he faced them with the certainty that he would never have to carry the weight alone. Because when you learn to trust in God, even the impossible becomes possible. Arthur's story is a powerful reminder of how often we are tempted to rely only on our own strength. He, like many of us, believed that success and fulfillment came from controlling every aspect of life. But it was precisely when he lost control that he discovered the true meaning of surrender and faith. How many times have we felt like Arthur at the beginning of the story? Overwhelmed, anxious, trying to solve everything with our own hands. It's easy to believe that if we work harder, plan better, or push ourselves beyond our limits, everything will work out. But there are times when, despite all our efforts, the doors remain closed and the challenges seem insurmountable. And this is exactly where Arthur's story touches our hearts. it shows us that trusting in God is not a last resort, but the first step. Throughout the narrative, we see that Arthur's transformation didn't happen when he secured the contract or when things improved financially. The true change began when he acknowledged that he needed help and made space for God to act. This is a precious lesson. Sometimes, God allows us to reach our limit so we can realize we are not alone and that there is a better path, the path of faith and dependence on Him. Another important point is the presence of Dona Celia in Arthur's life. How many times does God send us people who show us the right direction? But we are so absorbed in our problems that we don't listen. This character reminds us to be attentive to the voices of encouragement and wisdom that come into our path. They might be answers to our prayers. Moreover, the lesson of humility is evident. Arthur needed to acknowledge his limitations in order to experience God's grace. And this is something all of us face at some point. The pride that prevents us from asking for help or admitting we don't have all the answers. But, as the passage that inspired the story says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5-6. It is in surrender that we find direction. In the end, the greatest miracle wasn't Arthur's professional achievement, but the peace he found by trusting in God. And that peace is available to all of us. It doesn't mean our problems disappear, but by facing them with faith, we gain strength, wisdom, and serenity to overcome them. This story also inspires us to be like Dona Celia in the lives of others, who around us might be in need of a kind word, an invitation to start over, or a simple gesture of love. Sometimes, we are instruments of God to bring hope to those who are thinking of giving up. May we learn from Arthur to not wait until we hit rock bottom to seek God. Let faith be our daily foundation, our first choice, and not the last. And as we trust in Him, may we experience the truth that God always works for the good of those who love Him. Even when we don't understand what's happening, we can rest in the certainty that God has a perfect plan for us. We just need to trust. If you liked the video, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share. Let's reflect and talk to God together. See you in the next video.